Afternoon, everyone. I've just started the recording, so while you're entering, just acknowledging that we've started that recording so we can share with the wider sector. Hope you're all going well this afternoon and great that you're here. We're going to be using Menti again towards the end of this, so while you're kind of setting yourselves up, if you'd like to just jump onto Menti and pin on the map where you're dialing in from so that we can acknowledge the many lands that our sector is dialing in today from. So if you haven't used Menti before, but I'm pretty sure that most people will have by now, menti.com, or you can use the QR code, both in this slide and in the future ones as well that we've got towards the end of today. So we're going to be together for a little while, so make sure you've got a cup of tea and some water, make yourself comfortable, and we'll be getting cracking very soon. We've already got quite a large number of people, 139 in the room, so it's fantastic. So it'd be great to have you guys, just located on that map there.
Lauren, I think we've got a few technical issues with your voice. Can someone just confirm that they can hear me clearly?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Yeah, yes, okay. While Lauren's just addressing that, I can see people are already logging into Menti and telling us where you're from. It's great to, at the end of the session, to just make sure the whole of our state is represented. And it's good to see we've got, wow, from far south to far north already on the map. We'll be having a question and answers today. We are recording this session and we would love to see your faces, but we do understand if you would like to switch your video off for this session. You have come in on mute, but you will be able to unmute yourself when we get to questions. And at the end, we'll be doing a little check-in to make sure that we have the challenges that you have raised represented, and just a check-in as well about the types of support that you would like from FAMs going forward. So welcome everyone. We've got 151 people in the room already, so we'll give it a few more minutes before we get started. So as Lauren said, grab yourself a glass of water, make sure you're comfy and settle in for a really interesting conversation. Thanks so much, everyone, for putting in where you're coming from. We're looking, I'm looking at the map now. A couple of people are out to sea on the map. Hi, Marie. Thanks for joining us today. Oh, that's great to hear that Brittany is having some support. Good afternoon, June. Lovely to have you here. Just checking the time. 5 past. We're slowing up a little bit. What are your thoughts, team?
I think we can probably go ahead 5 minutes in.
I think so. We've got to around 158 and there's not that speed. We'll start slowly and get, just as I say that, there's a whole new load coming in, which is great. I'm going to get going now, and hopefully people will be able to catch up. I'd like to welcome you all to our second sector conversation on the recommissioning process. We held one a few weeks ago with over, I think it was 360 people came along, and we have nearly that many registering today. So it's obviously a very important topic for all of us going through this process. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we all are dialing in from and are meeting on today. I am calling to you from the beautiful Gadigal country, and I would like to extend my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. I'd like to welcome Anthony Shannon from DCJ. He doesn't really need much introduction these days. He's very popular in terms of he is touring the country, going around and talking to everyone about this process. And we're very grateful that Anthony has given us some more time today to be able to answer those questions. What you can see behind me on my screen is the challenges that we have heard about the recommissioning process. And that's what we've been gathered from probably up to about 400 people so far. So that's what we want to check in with you at the end. We'll do it's only a little short check-in workshop. You will note when you came in today that you were put on mute, but you can unmute yourself when it is time to ask questions. Please use the raise your hand function, and we do have Bronte from our team who will be managing that and will ensure that questions are answered. We will be going from questions from the floor to the list of questions that were sent to us following the last sector conversation. You can also put questions in the chat if that's your preferred way of asking those questions, and we'll ensure those are answered too. So without further ado, I will introduce Anthony. Do you want to say a few words before we start, Anthony?
I'd just like to say thanks for the opportunity to be welcomed back by fans. To talk with you again, answer your questions. And I too would just like to acknowledge country. I'm coming to you from Wongal country and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to Aboriginal people here today.
Thanks, Anthony. So without further ado, let's get going. Do we have some questions from the floor at the moment, Bronte? Or I can start with some of the questions.
Nothing just yet.
Okay. All right. Well, let's just start with the questions that we've got from the last session. One of the ones that came up was, Anthony, about the new package of funding and the TEI and Family Connect and Support, equal current levels of funding. Will that maintain the same throughout the recommissioning process?
Yes. So unfortunately, there's no new funding available for this round of recommissioning. So we'll be undertaking recommissioning with the existing program budgets that we have now. Each district has a budget that they've been managing over the last 5 years, and that budget will be the budget that they continue in terms of recommissioning. And just also noting, I guess, that indexation for individual contracts, flowed through this year. I think it was 5.65 that organisations received this year, and that is built into the base going forward. And we'll know next year whether we get indexation or not. But certainly, this program has attracted indexation over the last number of years, so we're hopeful that will occur again.
That leads me into another question that talked about that. They wanted some clarification that if there's no new money, will the current funding be indexed? But most importantly, the current indexation doesn't cover essentially things like increases in wage cost insurances and compliance. And we're actually asked to do the same with more. So in real terms, the organisations are getting less money. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, look, I think that's a very fair point. Indexation is something that New South Wales Treasury applies to individual programs year on, year out, depending on CPI changes for different programs. Sometimes programs get it 1 year, sometimes they don't. We only know each year whether it will be applied. But I think it's a fair point. Invariably, indexation doesn't really meet the CPI rate of that organisations are experiencing, and particularly over the last couple of years, the cost of living, the cost of delivering services, wage increases. Yes, they are putting financial pressure on organisations. I acknowledge it's difficult for organisations, and it's a pressure point which we have to manage in the program, and I know organisations are managing every day. Our job is to continue to advocate to government for extra funding in the program, which will hopefully be in a better place to do once we have our final evaluation reports for TEI and Family Connect and Support at the end of the year. But look, I think absolutely the demand on services is something that organisations are experiencing every day, and we acknowledge that's difficult with no new funding.
So Anthony, what would you advise for a CEO right now who's trying to work out going forward, knowing this is happening? Is that going to be acknowledged in the new contracts? Because maybe we're not going to be able to provide the service that we did last year because we've not got so much funding. What would your advice be?
Yeah, look, I think I think we need to make sure that the program remains sustainable, and what I mean by that is, we can only deliver services within the funding envelope that we have, and yes, if it means that outputs in contracts need to decrease to take into account cost increases for organisations, the cost of collecting data and administration, wage increases, then that's something that we need to do. And I think when you come to negotiate your contract, have that conversation with your commissioning and planning officer who you deal with all the time. It's a message that we're communicating to our districts in terms of recommissioning and when we get to contract negotiation. But I think we need to realise that we can't keep asking organisations to increase service delivery when funding is not increasing and costs are going up. So I think we need to reflect that cost realistically as much as we can in contracts, and make sure that the program and organisations are sustainable with the funding that they have and what we ask them to deliver.
So in terms of sustainability, I think what I'm hearing you saying is we really need to be costing in some of those things. I think that's perhaps what we've not done clearly in the past is what is the cost of having to put our decks in? What is the cost of some of the administration? And actually have that as a budget line. Is it a line item when budgets are presented to DCJ? I don't know.
Look, I think some organisations do obviously take into account those things as in terms of the way they manage their budgets and approach contract negotiations. Yeah, look, I think it's perfectly reasonable to take a global view of the funding that we give you and account, thinking about all the costs that you have to manage and what's viable and doable within the funding envelope that you have. So I certainly encourage you to think about that and from your organisational perspective and put that forward when time comes to negotiate your contract.
Yeah. And then on the other side of budget, there's budget and what we can achieve with that budget, but there's also people coming through the door that want help. So how do we manage that? That's a dilemma that I imagine a lot of our sectors are in. It's all very well saying, okay, I've got this much money and I have a budget and I'm contracted to do this, but another 20 or 30% of people are still coming through that door. What's your thoughts or your advice to services around that?
Yes, you're right. We are seeing increasing demand in the program, and we have for a number of years, particularly over the last 3 or 4 years. And even just looking at our data year in, year out, that's increasing, but even the data doesn't really adequately capture the extent of the work that organisations do in terms of supporting, people and families and communities. Really organisations, we acknowledge they need to kind of manage that as best they can. There is no new funding. The ability to kind of be able to provide a level of support that organisations want to be able to do in the communities they work with is just an ongoing tension in the program, and an ongoing tension that organisations, to be quite honest, face all the time. There's no easy answer to that question. There's no easy answer to managing demand. Short of increased funding. One of the strengths, I think, of the early intervention sector is the way that providers, particularly in the TEI program, work together in partnership, work in networks, to support, families and also to support other organisations. And I think, that will continue in the program because we know it's something that's important and organisations do well, but that's not an answer to kind of managing demand. It's just it's a way of coping with some of those pressures. But in short, there's no easy solution to that at the moment, unfortunately.
The important thing, though, Anthony, would be to collect that unmet demand information.
Well, I mean, in our data collection for the program, we're really mindful that we don't want organisations collecting data for data's sake. We've been quite intentional in the program around identifying what data we think is important to understand the impact of the program, to understand whether the program is actually delivering outcomes. and also to understand, you know, where the program is being delivered, who it's supporting, and you know what it's delivering. And that's been really helpful for the evaluation. And we've never had that data in the TEI program before. Since you know, now that we've introduced DEX, we do. You know, we wouldn't specifically ask organisations to collect that data. A lot of organisations do anyway. But you know, our focus in terms of data collection is really on collecting the data that, you know, is in that your contract asks you to deliver, so that we can understand impact and outcomes. You know, the evaluation is looking at demand. So there's a process underway in the evaluation to look at demand within the program, and the interim evaluation report, you know, when it's published, we'll have some information about that, and the final one certainly. But, you know, we're not really asking organisations to capture everything they do, because it's simply places an unrealistic kind of burden on organisations. And we're not requiring organisations to collect unmet demand data. But look, having said that, I know that a lot of organisations do, and a lot of organisations enter data above and beyond, because they're simply providing a service above and beyond what's in their contract.
Yeah.
Thank
you. Bronte, we might go to questions or the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a bunch coming through. The first question we have here, Anthony, is asking for some clarification on the status of subcontracts in the new contract.
So subcontracting is really an arrangement that organisations will, you know, negotiate between each other, and then come to DCJ and put forward that as a, you know, proposal when they come to negotiate their contract. Subcontracting arrangements are always something that require, you know, the approval of DCJ, you know, with, you know, when we're negotiating the contract, or subsequently if things change once we've signed the contract and you want to enter into a subcontracting negotiation. So, you know, it's really a matter of, you know, bringing those arrangements to your contract manager and having a conversation really around whether, you know, we're willing to support that.
Thanks, Anthony. I can see the person who asked the question here, Karen, has put their hand up. So Karen, if you had a question that you'd like to clarify, you want to jump in.
Hi, Anthony. My question is around the fact that we, as a small provider in a place-based service, provide a subcontract to a larger organisation. We've heard rumblings that those larger organisations will no longer consider subcontracts, and yet they are many kilometres away from our office, and we are a collection point for a number of different services that clients come to from the local community. So what support can we as small services go in to advocate for maintaining a subcontract arrangement?
So just to clarify, your service delivery, you're subcontracted by another organisation who's
yes.
contracted with TEI funds. Look, really what I'd say is, I mean, that's really an arrangement that you'll need to negotiate with the organisation who you have those subcontracting arrangements with. You know, that's really the business of the sector to kind of organise themselves in terms of how you deliver services in, you know, in your contracting arrangements. It's, you know, not something that we would get involved in negotiating a subcontract between different parties. It's really something for the sector to sort out and bring to DCJ in terms of whether we're willing to support that or not.
Does that answer your question, Karen, or give you any?
It doesn't give me any comfort, no. But anyway,
no.
Thank you.
Bronte, we might go with a few in the chat while we're here.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a question here mentioning that the TEI evaluation interim report is not available until mid-July, despite it originally meaning to be due last September, and just wanted to ask what the delay for that was.
Yes, we're the publishing of the TEI interim evaluation report, we've now updated that to July. We're hoping it will be done earlier. Unfortunately, the approval process is going through at the moment with the Human Services Dataset Governance Group is taking longer than anticipated. Each government agency that has data in that HSDS gets to look at the report and provide comments, and that's just proving, unfortunately, to be a longer process than anybody anticipated, which is very frustrating for you, and it's, believe me, very frustrating for us as well. But as soon as we do have those approvals and our ethics approval and our secretary's approval, we'll publish that interim evaluation report in full on the DCJ website. The interim evaluation report provides some really positive information around the program, great feedback from providers around the impact of the program and the work they're doing. Provides some really helpful information around improvements to the program, which we've kind of talked about a little bit with the recommissioning and our program specifications, which will come out shortly. But look, I understand, obviously, the sector wants to see the report, and we're hoping it'll be sooner than July, but we've kind of decided to be a bit cautious and move that date from April. It was originally September some months ago, move it from April to July, in saying that we're hoping it'll be done sooner.
Thanks, Anthony. And Margaret, this is the question you asked, and I can see your hands up. Did you have more to mention on that?
Anthony probably knows my feelings on this. I'll just remember, if I'm doing research for government, that I can quite easily delay my delivery date from the original contracted date. And I'm sounding a bit flippant, because I actually think the Family Connect services, when was their actual evaluation done? It was done around the same time. So how can one be so deliverable and the report's already done, but ours not? I actually feel a bit let down and second rate. And I know that sounds highly personal and emotional, but there's a lot riding on this, and whether it's positive or negative, it's not about the content, it's actually about the optics around it. And I think and Anthony, you'll know my thoughts on this, I think it's just really disappointing, and I feel almost second rate around it, that and it's great that everything's being checked and stuff like that, but I am very disappointed when the Family Connect services were done around the same time, and their reports, or a little bit earlier, their report's been out for months.
Yeah, look, I think I hear your disappointment, Margaret, and look, to be honest with you, I share that disappointment. We would have liked the TEI interim evaluation report to be published sooner. The main difference really is that the Family Connect and support evaluation is not using the human services data set. So, the process is much more straightforward. The TEI evaluation is using the human services data set. So it's, part of this lengthy approval process. The evaluators, SVA, Social Ventures Australia, Taylor Fry and Gamarada, Indigenous Universal Resources, they've submitted their reports on time. It's just the approval process inside government that's proving the delays. But your disappointment around the delays, is a fair point. And, unfortunately, we're caught up in this approval process, and hopefully, it'll work its way through, and that information will be available.
Thanks, Anthony. I have another question here asking about the department's position about managing growth due to humanitarian settlers, some of whom are highly disadvantaged.
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a number of places across the state where there's been some growth, of people in communities where there's simply no services being delivered, or not enough services being delivered. Certainly, the local planning process will look at that. Districts will, take that into account in terms of their discussions locally around local planning, and see what options are available to address, those local kind of priorities. So, look, I'd encourage you to, involve yourself in the local planning process. Raise those issues. Certainly, we know in parts, for example, in southwest Sydney, where there's some particular growth corridors. Parts of rural and regional New South Wales where there's been significant, recently arrived migrants. Those places, that will be, is expected to be a local priority. So, I'd encourage you to have those conversations and see what can be done around any kind of changes to your service system to where you can within your funding to better be able to address that.
So, Anthony, in terms of that data, will that be what is made available at the district planning meeting? Is that one of the data sets that will be there?
All the data that is available for local planning is up on the DCJ TEI website. So I'd encourage everybody to have a look at that, familiarise yourself with it for your location, and then bring your local knowledge of the community in which you work into those conversations, because obviously the data can only tell us so much, but it's your kind of local input as well from your service delivery on the ground and your engagement with communities that's really kind of important as well.
just specifically that data on changes in population? Is that data that's going to be available?
Well, I can check the website now and see if we can maybe.
The question was around, you know, new people coming into the area from different backgrounds, and if that's not captured in the data, how are they then going to advocate?
Yeah, I might ask one of my colleagues is on the line, Felicity. I might ask Felicity to have a look at the website as we're answering questions and just see if there's any specific data around that, and then we can pop that in the chat.
Yep, I can do that. No probs.
Thank you.
Okay, and there's also someone saying we can get migrant data in the ABS census, so it would be really good to have that information going in. Great. We might just go to a question from the last sector meeting. We've got a service that said we have a large number of specialist cold providers in our area, including so much are very ethno-specific. They've already had to embrace much change to pivot their service delivery and are also trying to meet the needs of their services and their communities. There are lots of questions here about cold communities, and it'd be great to hear whether there will be funding for these emerging groups, which is what we've just been talking about, and whether there will be specific funding allocated for cold communities in the recommissioning.
The cold families and communities are an important part of TEI service delivery in the current program, and that will continue in the next iteration of the program and contracts over the next 5 years. That hasn't changed at all. The focus on supporting cold families in the current program will continue into the new program. There's no change there. I think in 21-22, we had about 16% of individual clients identified as being from a culturally and linguistically diverse background. And, you know, we do fund, you know, a range of services that provide supports, you know, across a range of cold communities. And obviously that focus will continue. You know, in different parts of our state, in different districts, there is, you know, a focus and local priority on focusing on, you know, cold families and cold communities. Again, you know, that will continue. We expect that to be particularly in places like Southwest Sydney and, as I mentioned, in different parts of regional New South Wales. You know, those local priorities, you know, we'd expect to see as important as the, you know, as the sector identifying those as important as well. So that, unfortunately, as you know, as we've mentioned, there is no new funding. So, you know, we can't kind of commit to additional, you know, funding going into the program to support, you know, cold families. But, you know, there's a range of funding already being delivered to cold families, and, you know, that's expected to continue. There's no change really to that focus in the program.
Thank you. Bronte, back to you.
I can just see Julie's got her hand up here if you wanted to pop in, Julie.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Anthony. And you probably know this because you love your data, but just others might not know this on the webinar today. So when DEX captures cold data, it's only capturing those who were born in another country. And I know that a lot of people do know that, but it's important to note. So, for example, we might get a family whose mother was born overseas, father was born overseas, but the 3 children were born in Australia. So it throws out the data. So we would be almost 100% cold service, but according to the DEX data, we're probably only about 55, 60%. So just thought it would be worthwhile raising here.
Yeah, it's a good point. The DEX, the data exchange, requires 2 questions around identifying cold status, country of birth, and a language other than English being spoken at home. And both of those need to be ticked for a cold status to be identified. It's a long-standing issue in the DEX data exchange around the definition of cold. It's, you know, it is an undercount. That's feedback we've given to DEX and other jurisdictions as well. It's something that we're continuing to talk to DSS about. The difficult part of changing that is, you know, DSS needs to change that definition. If they do, it affects all programs that are funded through the data exchange, so all the Commonwealth programs, all the other programs that other states and territories use in DEX, and New South Wales, obviously. So it's really difficult to get DSS to kind of agree to that change, to change that to better reflect, you know, a better definition of cold. It's something that we'll keep raising with DSS, but your point is right. It is an undercount.
It's good to hear you're challenging and capturing that data, Anthony. Bronte.
Yes, I've got a question here mentioning that DCJ states that 10% admin cost with flexibility based on size of org. And then sort of following with that, there's a question asking if they'll be allowed to increase administration budget to allow for increased costs, say 25%, as that is what it's currently costing them.
I'm not sure. Well, in terms of the question, DCJ doesn't have a set definition of what an admin cost or fee should be. Usually that's something that's negotiated by organisations when they negotiate their contract, and a lot of organisations have negotiated different admin costs. That's obviously dependent on all sorts of things that, you know, in relation to the organisation, the contract and what's being delivered. You know, all I would say is, you know, you need to look at your budget, obviously, and what, you know, what the contract is offering you in terms of, you know, funding and what you think you can deliver within that funding envelope, and what your other costs are, and have those conversations when you negotiate your contract. We don't set a specific, you know, percentage of funding that's in your contract for admin. That's something that you usually bring to a conversation when you negotiate your contract.
That's a very interesting point, Anthony. Having been in many contract negotiations where there's often is a set amount, and what now concerns me is, because our sector is trying so hard to do so much with so little, that the one thing in the budget that they'll pull back on is admin, because they want to get the contract and they want to service their clients as much as possible. Is it a conversation that you'd be willing to have, trying to set some sort of benchmark, or between 10 and 15 or 10 and 25%, just to encourage more services to be open and upfront about their admin costs? Because it's one that's always a sticking point for us when we're right down to the wire in putting in our funding application, or in renegotiating our contract. Because in a small amount of money, the admin can be as much for a small organisation as a bigger one. In fact, sometimes it can be more, because the person doing it costs more, because it's often a higher paid person doing admin.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's really why the difficulty in trying to do something that you're suggesting, like, I guess we'd be really reluctant to kind of look at, you know, benchmarking an admin fee, you know, simply because of the point you just made. You know, we really have a really diverse sector across TEI. We have some very small organisations, some very large organisations, but we have some very small organisations with very small funding amounts. And some of our organisations, the only funding they receive is from DCJ, and sometimes that funding amount is small, and you know, their admin cost proportionally is significantly more, because some of those fee costs, as you know, are fixed really, and it's really difficult to, you know, bring those down. So it's really difficult to, you know, benchmark an admin fee. It's not really something that we've heard much feedback from the sector around. I mean, you know, typically when we do try to kind of mandate those types of fees, we do get, you know, a lot of feedback from the sector around the challenges around that. So, you know, based on previous kind of feedback around that sort of kind of approach, you know, it's not really something we'd be looking to do.
But what we're hearing from you today is to be as realistic as possible when putting in your budgets, and that's not going to be seen as a bad thing. I think it's changing that culture for the sector to actually really try and do those workings out. And yes, it might not be a benchmark, but in terms of writing in what the real costs are, and there's an opportunity to negotiate that going forwards, but to try and really work out what your admin fee, what your admin costs are, so that you can be sustainable, because that's where you lose your sustainability if you don't have that support. Thank you. Rocky.
I've just got Christy who's put their hand up in response to these questions. If you wanted to jump in, Christy.
Yeah, hi. Just wanted to, the sector's constantly being asked to reform. We're constantly being asked about this admin component, all of those things. Is there any concept from DCJ to look at DEX as a data collection, to change it in any way? Like, obviously it's not collecting the data that we need it to collect. It's not collecting the data in the best way possible. Is there not another way to collect the data? Can we not look at alternative options to DEX? Is DCJ even looking at that as a concept?
Yeah, look, we had it's a good question. A lot of people have different views about DEX, and the evaluation in particular has provided some really good kind of feedback from the sector around DEX. A couple of things I guess I'd say. One is that when the evaluators surveyed the sector around their use of DEX and feedback, they got a really good response rate. I think something like 310 or so responses. That's a lot of organisations, much higher than what we normally expect back from a survey of that size.
Not surprised.
49% of organisations said that they find DEX easy to use, and I think it was 47% said they find it difficult to use. So we have a real contrast in the sector around views around DEX. Some organisations find it easy to use. Some organisations really like it. Other organisations find it difficult to use and don't like it. And I think it's really dependent on a number of things. Obviously, whether you're delivering community strengthening or wellbeing and safety, the size of your organisation, how much funding you get, how much staff turnover you have, particularly if you're a small organisation and you have one person who's doing your data entry and they leave. There's all sorts of kind of factors that kind of impact on that. People have different views around score, which is the kind of outcome side of DEX, as opposed to the outputs, which is kind of like your actual service delivery. Some people are happy with the output data, don't like score, and vice versa. So there's some really different views around DEX, and our view, having looked at all the feedback and reconsidered it, and looking at the value we get out of the DEX data, our overall consideration is that we are going to continue with the DEX data. We've made some changes and streamlined the data collection, which we're hoping will certainly make it a lot easier for providers. We've reduced duplication, got rid of some of the service types, and you'll see a bit more detail of that in the program specifications when they come out. The other thing I would say is that there is a lot of support available to help organisations with DEX. We have a number of organisations we work with that provide one-on-one support to you. So if you haven't accessed that support, please contact your district commissioning and planning officer and let them know. We're happy to get that organisation out to, and we pay for that. 20 hours they'll come and sit beside you, one-on-one support to help you sort out any challenges you have with the system and set up and make your process much more streamlined.
I don't have a problem with using DEX, and I use DEX for 4 of my funding programs that we've currently got with our service. So it's not the use of DEX that's my issue. Right. It's the fact that the culturally and linguistically diverse thing is one of the issues that we have. The fact that it's not collecting, those family data things correctly. Like if we're putting particular information in and we're not getting the correct information out the other end, it makes it really difficult to use it appropriately if we're not getting that information out the other end. I work with a community centre, for example, that is from a highly called area that a lot of the people that are identifying there are not necessarily born or speak a different language from a different, so they're not being identified, but they have all the characteristics and all the issues with the called communities. So, you've got that catch-22 of if we're not getting that information in the data and it's not reflected in what the outcomes of the data present, then how do you actually justify that?
Well, look, I think, there is, with the data collection of this size, there's always kind of challenges around the trade-off really between, having a consistent data set that captures, a minimum data set, which helps you understand, outcomes and helps you understand impact and what's being delivered where, against the trade-off of, making that much more individualized or localized or collected, particularly in the outcome space, collected in a way that makes it difficult to kind of understand from a data perspective outcomes. There is some faults with DEX. We know that the kind of called identification is one of them. The outcomes, the score component, there's some good questions being asked through the evaluation process around the effectiveness of score in the community strengthening space. Mm-hmm. And that's that when we get the final report, we'll be in a better place to talk to you more around that kind of information. Look, I think it's just a matter of kind of, keeping the conversation going around, where there is issues in DEX and what we can do about it. look, from a program level, we've made the decision to continue with DEX because, on balance and overall, we think it's it's a good collection to use for the program.
Okay, thank you. Just putting thoughts forward.
Thank you. That's what today's about. Thank you for your question. Bronte.
I've also got Catherine, you have your hand up as well.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the issue around the admin costs, and just, I suppose, to offer a different perspective, because whilst I see what the constraints around benchmarks are, what I actually see is that sector services are being upfront about their admin and management costs and are being told by DCJ, by their particular CPO, that there are benchmarks, that there are limits, and they're actually having those costs reduced. So CPO is not being willing to approve the budget. So I guess I just want to have some balance. I don't think it's helpful to kind of blame the sector for them not actually having sustainable budgets. And I think that there might need to be clearer advice to CPOs for consistency across the districts, that actually if there aren't limits, then they shouldn't be setting them. Because I hear from services all the time in the same district sometimes, but with different CPOs, where one will have 20% admin costs approved, another CPO will say, no, you can't have more than 15%. So benchmarks are problematic, but the lack of any direction or clear advice or consistency from the department is just as problematic.
Yeah, look, it sounds like I hear you've had some challenges with your negotiations. But one thing I would say, I'm not blaming, or I didn't blame the sector for not having balanced budgets. That's something that I didn't say. I was simply responding to the point that, and actually supporting organisations to say that, if you we don't have benchmarks because it disadvantages some organisations. Some organisations conversely might think that's a helpful thing, but consistent feedback from the sector around kind of benchmarking these types of things is that it doesn't work. We're not saying it's the sector's fault about not having balanced budgets. I mean, that's not something that's kind of entered into the conversation at all. It's really a matter of having that conversation with your district. And yes, some admin costs are different for different organisations, and sometimes those decisions are taken for different reasons. They're taken within the negotiations that occur with organisations. And look, all I can say to you is, need to have that conversation. It is a negotiation when you come to your contract around what your admin, your budget, and it's a matter of having that conversation and having that negotiation. But just to kind of reiterate, it's not, this conversation around admin costs is in no way blaming the sector at all.
Sorry, no, I'm not suggesting you were. I guess the idea, though, from Susan, around the sector services need to be honest and upfront. I don't think that's actually the issue. I think most services are trying to be upfront.
That's really good to hear, but obviously concerning is when you are open and transparent and then you get knocked back. Sustainability of your organisation has that potential to be negative. So I'm just wondering whether that's a conversation we need to keep going with as we go into recommissioning, so that it's very clear from Anthony what's expected across the districts. And yes, they're locally negotiated, but often when you go into a negotiation, you don't know what other services have put up. So that was where I was talking about. Sometimes you underestimate your admin, because that's the one thing that you can move a little bit and to adjust your budget. But let's keep talking about that going forward. Bronte.
Thanks. I've just got one more from Sue. Put your hand up, and then we'll jump back into the chat because there's a lot in there as well.
Thank you. Anthony, I recognise you're in a really difficult position, and yeah, that's hard. My question's a little bit random. It is related to TEI though, and around the shortage of money, and yet consultants are being used. And I'm going to use the example of communities of practice, and the consultants are working with us on a community of practice, particularly around the program logics and so on. And they haven't consulted with us at all. They're telling us now about what's in the program logic, fine enough. But with the community of practice, they've basically assumed we don't know anything, and they're talking about really, really basic stuff. So I suppose my frustration is around the amount of money that goes into a consulting organisation, some parts of it of which are doing a great job, but then this other part that I'm talking about with the community of practice, and I will talk about it locally to my CPO, but I just want to voice my frustration there about use of funds.
Look, I think you might be talking about the pilot communities of practice we've got in Newcastle and
yeah, that's right,
Western Sydney around some of the wellbeing and support work around the preventing child maltreatment evidence review. Look, I think what I would say is that we've put a lot of investment and time and resources together with the sector into kind of supporting and building the evidence base in early intervention and supporting translation of that evidence base into the program. It's an important part of the program. It's one of the kind of key reform platforms we had from when we did this reform 5 years ago, which took us some time to get to, and the last couple of years we've put a lot of effort into that. This piece of work around evidence-informed approach in the program is really important. We want to make sure what we're investing in, is informed by both the research evidence, voice of clients, and also practitioner expertise. And so communities of practice are kind of a standard approach that a lot of practitioners use across different kind of formats to build, kind of use practice knowledge and wisdom to help kind of, support that kind of translation of evidence into practice. The consultants that we're using, it's very, very, very modest, less than modest investment in that kind of evidence translation process, and compared to the benefit that we're hoping to get from that, and the future benefit in terms of translation of evidence, where we're thinking that it's a good for that very small investment of fund.
I'm absolutely pro evidence base and getting that into practice. I just feel like there hasn't, yes, as you say, it's a pilot. I also noted that most of the evidence was from the US as well, which was a bit frustrating. So I appreciate it's a pilot and we're learning, and okay, so it wasn't much of an investment. That's good. But I still think there could have been more consultation about what. I've been in communities of practice before, and it's certainly at a high level, and I appreciate that everybody isn't at the same level either. But
yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's the challenge really, and resourcing and supporting those things, as kind of takes time and resources. And we could have come to the sector and asked somebody to do that within their existing budget, but we decided not to. We decided to support the sector by resourcing it outside of the existing programs and the existing services that deliver community sector coordination. But look, it's we'll see how effective it is. If it's not effective, then we won't continue it. But we'll see kind of what the outcome of it is.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Bronte, I can see the chat building.
I've got a question here about the 30% investment target. Someone said, as a mainstream provider in communities with high Aboriginal populations and delivering a universal service, what will the transition to ACCOs look like? Are you anticipating a split with one service targeting Aboriginal families and other targeting other families?
Look, what I'll say about the investment target is, obviously it's a priority for DCJ and for government. And the local planning process is the place where those conversations will occur, and where we might look to, obviously if money becomes available, ACCOs will be prioritised. We don't have any preset view or predetermined outcome around what the service system should or would look like, apart from acknowledging that we do want to increase investment obviously in ACCOs. Non-ACCOs delivering services to Aboriginal people will continue to be an important part of the service system. Aboriginal people, empowering Aboriginal people around choice, ensuring that people have a choice of both ACCOs and non-ACCOs is something we've heard from communities is important, and that'll continue to be a feature of the early intervention system.
Thanks,
Anthony, just flowing on from that. So when, in terms of that 70 to 30%, because that is something that has come up quite a lot in our sector conversations, what are your thoughts in how you're saying it's when money gets given back, so there's no real control over that, but what has been the precedent set in terms of the last 5 years? And if we continue with that, where do you think we'll be by the end of these 5-year contracts?
Well, it's a hard question to answer, really, because the recommissioning process, we won't know the quantity of funds that come back through that process, through the local planning, until it occurs. So, look, we can't really forecast where we'll be between now and 2030. There's the recommissioning. Look, to be honest, we're hopeful we'll get new funding, and that will obviously make a significant kind of inroad into that target, but that remains to be seen.
So there'll be the recommissioning where there might be a change, and then as we go forward, there will be, when money is handed back or rescinded, or then it will be, the priority will be to go to ACOs. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. So recommissioning there may be some money become available through that process, but certainly once contracts are signed, and from July 2030 onwards, invariably, as has occurred over the last 5 years, organisations relinquish funds. There's performance management issues where contracts end. Sometimes organisations fold. That happens more often than what people probably are aware of, and those funds again, yes, become available. So once contracts are signed, that process will continue in terms of source of funding for redirection to ACOs.
Okay, Bronte.
Thank you. So just scrolling back up to where I was up to, I was just reading as we go. I've got a question here asking about if competitive tendering is going to occur. As there is no new money, how will the current funds be shared around? Does it mean some services receive more or less funding than previously provided?
So once we do the local planning process and the service redesign locally with you, districts will put up a recommissioning plan to the minister, and once that plan is approved, then what we'll look to do is, where there's no change to service delivery, or there's minimal change in those plans, we'll look to negotiate contracts with existing TEI providers in the first instance. So that'll be a contract negotiation with existing providers that won't involve a competitive tendering process. Where those endorsed plans indicate significant change, we have two options. We may look to negotiate with existing providers, or we may look to have a procurement process locally, and that will really be determined on the scale of the change, where that change is happening, kind of what the market analysis looks like. So we won't really know that information until those plans are signed off. But any kind of tender processes will only be where there's significant change agreed to by the minister, and we've had a look at the market analysis and decided that we're not able to negotiate with existing providers, and we do have to go to market.
Bronte.
I've just got one here, a comment mentioning that DEX was originally sold, that it would capture the data, and with that data it would provide the evidence for increasing funding. And there's a mention that it's time consuming and tedious, and that now there's no talk of increased funding. And then to follow on from that, there's also a follow-up question saying, do we have a time frame of when a case might be put forward with the data collected?
So yes, the DEX data is a valuable input into the evaluation process. Without that, the evaluators would not be able to make any recommendations and determinations around the effectiveness of the program. It simply would not be possible. So the DEX data is absolutely critical to the outcomes analysis of the program and the economic analysis within the evaluation. And the outcomes analysis in the evaluation and the economic evaluation are two critical components with which we need to be able to put a business case to government, particularly the Treasury, around the effectiveness of the program, the cost effectiveness of the program, the benefits for communities and the benefits for government. Once we get those final evaluation reports later this year, we'll be in a place then to do that work on, making that case and putting forward to government. Look, unfortunately, I can't give you a clear time frame of when that will occur, but unfortunately, we don't have that available now for recommissioning. But to be honest, like we're optimistic around the opportunity to be able to do that, next year. And we're hopeful that funding will become available. Government's made some really clear statements around the importance of early intervention. It's certainly promising. We haven't really been in this position for quite some time with government, so look, we're optimistic. But as I mentioned before, it'll time will tell around the outcome of that.
Thanks, Anthony. Bronte.
Just reading through, just filtering the ones that have already been answered.
While you're looking, I might pull one up.
Yeah, great idea.
Could existing TEI providers be asked to work in different communities as a result of local planning?
Possibly, yes. Where there's a significant change that might require a change of location, again will be dependent on the local planning and the service system redesign, whether locally there's any kind of change to where services are being delivered. But also, I guess when we're looking at kind of minimal change, in metro areas, for example, that might mean a change of location, but it would be minimal, obviously, because it'd be in a category of minimal where oftentimes metro change of locations have much less impact, obviously, than regional rural. But again, there may be change of locations in metro areas that are significant as well. So if they're significant, there's proposed changes in that category, but also if they're minimal. But where they're minimal, it will mean a contract negotiation around those changes.
Okay. How are you going, Bronte?
I've got a question asking when the service specs will be available.
So we're hoping that they'll be available mid-April. They're just going through some final approvals now, the draft version to be released. We're hoping by mid-April to have those on the DCJ website for you.
And what length of time will they be for response, Anthony?
A couple of months. We're looking at probably about 2 months worth of consultation on those program specifications.
So end June?
In June. If we need to extend that, we certainly can. We really don't need to finalise specs until the end of the year. And one of the things we are planning on doing is, after the consultation's finished, I guess kind of landing a draft version, if you like. We do want to wait until the final evaluation report from TEI is released to the sector so that everybody can see that final evaluation report. And if we need to revisit the specs, the program specifications, and have further conversations with the sector, then we'll have the opportunity and we'll do that. So we won't be finalising them in effect until the end of the year to allow for that to happen.
That's good to hear. Thank you. Bronte.
I've got someone here saying that as a generalist agency, they're very much working on relationships with ACOs, and it is helping with outcomes for people across all of the agencies involved. Our region has made good progress towards the 30% and appears to be getting the impact minimal to positive on existing continuing services. Would it be possible to get some best practice stories and examples shared in the sector?
That's a good suggestion. Yeah, I think that's certainly something we can look at doing. We'll put that down as something to follow up.
That would be a great one to discuss at the council, Anthony.
Yep.
Wonderful. Bronte, have you got some more?
I think most are answered for now. If anyone feels like their question was missed, feel free to pop it in there again or put your hand up. And in the meantime, maybe Susan, if you've got more questions to ask, we can run back to those.
I do have a couple. One of them is, with child safe standards now being in play with no additional money, it seems that we are cost shifting from service delivery to compliance. Has any thought been given to that? Again, we've got that admin question, Anthony, around implementing child safe standards.
Look, certainly we'd encourage all organisations to be child safe. We'd encourage all organisations to, take on board the child safe standards. They were introduced to ensure that organisations working with children are safe and respond better to child abuse. The requirements for meeting the child safe standards sit with the Office of the Children's Guardian, and there's a range of information available on their website around how organisations can, work towards meeting those standards and the expectations for organisations that are part of the child safe scheme. That compliance or that kind of monitoring role sits with the Office of the Children's Guardian. DCJ is not responsible for that. We're certainly encouraging all organisations to be child safe and to work towards delivering those child safe standards within the TEI program.
And I know, Anthony, you and I have had many conversations about child safe standards, and just watch this space, because we will be hosting a sector conversation for the sector on child safe standards and really starting to look at what that might look like, what the long term, what we want to achieve at the end, and some of the ways we can get there as quickly and easily with the least amount of impact on services going forward. Should I continue, Bronte, with the couple that we've got left? We're almost at time to move across to our little check-in. Will there be opportunities to join together and be funded to work together on joint projects and communities? So I'm thinking like a consortium type model.
Look, I think that certainly there's no reason why the TEI program can't support those types of initiatives. I mean, as we talked about before, there's a range of kind of subcontracting arrangements that TEI providers have, different kind of consortia that come together. Again, I kind of put that back on the sector and say that's really kind of a something, if the sector wishes to organise themselves in that way, then that's something that you should do and bring that forward to your contract manager when time comes to negotiate your contract.
Thank you. It's more of a statement, but it's something that I know has been raised before. It's important not to just prioritise workforce development, but to equip services to enable to embed professional development as a continuous quality improvement mechanism for good practice that are consistent across the sector. I know you've mentioned this before, and I thought it was important for you to reiterate today what your thoughts are going forward with recommissioning and professional development and sector workforce development.
Yeah, it's a good point. One of the principles of recommissioning is looking to do more to support workforce capability across the sector. We acknowledge that kind of access to no cost and affordable training is important for the sector, particularly given the low funding amounts that a lot of targeted early intervention providers have. And our recommissioning principles are around our commitment to do something more in that space with you. And we don't necessarily specifically have something in mind, but we do want to talk more with the peaks in the sector around what that might look like. And I think that Early Intervention Central Council is a good kind of place to have those conversations with peaks. Look, in the meantime, there is some free and affordable training available to TEI providers through DCJ. The Change Together program, provides that on the DCJ website. So I encourage you to have a look at that as well.
Thank you. And we've also had a question around disability and that DCJ has a role with disability, but this doesn't seem to have been mentioned very much to date. How does disability fit in the recommissioning? How will we raise the profile and raise the advocacy for the services that are working with families and children with disabilities?
Well, look, certainly families and people with disability do access TEI services, and that appears in the data. We know that organisations do support people with disability in the program. There's been no change to that at all. That'll continue. Obviously, there's quite a lot of discussion on what's coming out of the NDIS review, and obviously, from government, we'll look to see kind of some of those directions and see kind of what the impact is, or what else the TEI program might be able to do around some of that. But certainly at the moment, there's been no change to the support that people currently with disability receive through the program.
Great. And I've got another one here about funding. The question is, what happened to the 49 million that was saved as per the Minister's press release on high needs care, moving children from out-of-home care out of hostels? Do you have any insight as to, we were told there was this money saved, but then we were then in the second breath told that there's no new money for us?
I'm not sure what I can say about press releases. Look, there's no new money for the TEI program. In terms of the out-of-home care budget and program, it's not really something I have much line of sight in. But look, early intervention obviously is facing demand and needs new investment, and that's certainly, as we've talked about, that's certainly we'll be putting that case to government, hopefully, towards the end of this year and next year.
Thanks, Anthony. It's important that all questions are answered. Has anyone got any question that they hasn't been answered, or something that they would like to ask Anthony today before we move into our little check-in as to whether we're on?
Sorry, I can see Carly's got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. So I'm new to the recommissioning process, and I wasn't with the organisation when the original contract was negotiated. I'm looking to negotiate our contract, and I'm needing to gather evidence that will support my argument. What I'm trying to understand, and excuse me if it's been communicated earlier, but if I am going to be negotiating deliverables, is there, like I have asked before, but things don't have a sort of set price, and so that makes it sort of difficult to negotiate. I'm also wondering if there's been means testing done on the contract. I'm pretty sure ours has a typo because it has just a jump out of one KPI that doesn't relate to any of our other KPIs. The relationship seems very strange. And so when I sat down and broke it down to what we would consider for that KPI a good level of time with the participants, so it's around family capacity building to deliver that, it just seems like the contract, like KPIs are unattainable. It's not even possible to do with the funding that we have at the moment. So I'm a little bit unsure about how to approach that. I also wanted to ask around the milestones. There's no budget allocated to the milestones in our contract. And yeah, so I was just wondering if those sorts of things have been highlighted and they're going to be communicated in a way that I'm not quite sure whether I should start with what I have or if I should wait for communication so that I will have a clearer direction of how to sort of put a report forward about what we would like going forward.
There's a few things in there. I'll kind of work through them one at a time. So in terms of unit costing, you're right, we don't have any unit costing in the TEI program. It's something that's been debated quite a lot throughout the TEI sector over quite a number of years, and people have different views around unit costing and the effectiveness of it and the usefulness of it. Some organisations have supported that in the past. A lot of organisations, on balance, haven't. So we've taken the view from overwhelmingly from feedback from the sector that unit costing is not the way to go in the TEI program, given the diversity of kind of service delivery we have. And the different models of service delivery that organisations are providing, we've taken the decision to not set a unit price. So having said that, outputs are negotiated by organisations with DCJ when you negotiate contracts. So when once the report goes to the minister and we understand which contracts can be negotiated and which ones will require, which funding will require going to tender, where the negotiation occurs, that's the point where, yes, you put forward, what you look at your program logic, you put forward what you think you want to be delivering in terms of outputs, and you have that negotiation, with your contract manager at the district level. So you don't necessarily need to, produce a report around that or kind of gather evidence around that. It's really, all your data is in the DEX data exchange. You can see all what you've delivered over the last 5 years, really. So can DCJ. So all that information is available there for you in terms of those outputs. But certainly, organisations in the past, sometimes they've negotiated outputs, realised they're too high, gone back to DCJ and renegotiated those and buried their contract. You can do that. There's nothing that limits, those conversations occurring. Obviously, they need to be agreed by DCJ and yourself, but that's available to you. In terms of milestones, in our last reform, which we did 4 years ago, we had some milestones for some organisations, which were really just kind of markers to say, if you made changes that you'd agreed to, you would get extra, years in your contract. Going forward from 2025 onwards, we won't be having milestones. So that kind of concept was really to support, change and reform when we did the major reform of TEI. This recommissioning process is not a major change. There'll be no milestones. Everybody who's offered a contract will be offered a 5-year contract. Just one more thing. So in terms of communication, so we'll look to, in January, February next year, we'll look to inform, or by February certainly, we'll look to inform all organisations who will be negotiating contracts with that they'll be offered a new contract and commence those negotiations. So February is the kind of date we're looking at there. Sorry.
Just one more question. Sorry, I know time's short.
That's okay.
With the DEX, so for example, we have DEX only counts clients. So we have a couple of really, really engaged parents at the moment. And fortunately, they are going to every parenting program that we have, which is great. It means they're visiting up to 4 to 6 parenting programs in a year, but they're only getting counted once because they're a client. And so our resources are going into delivering that program 6 times to one individual, but the KPI is only recorded once because DEX just counts the client and not the sessions. Is there anything, is the session data going to be slowly looked at as well, rather than just the number of clients who attend a program?
Yeah, so in DEX, if it's an individual client, you do count sessions. That data is available. You should be entering the occasions of the sessions that you're doing with that client for individual clients.
It's counted, but it doesn't reflect in our contract or in our KPI. So
no, that's right. So the data collection captures the session. So, that in effect captures the intensity of service, if you like, that you're talking about. But contracts, no, they don't kind of require a certain level of service, if you like, to be required to clients, because we don't have any criteria or time limits around support for families or individuals in TEI. We want to make sure it's flexible. And it kind of goes back to some of our earlier conversations today around sustainability. And, if you're working with a lot of families that require, additional support, again, go back to your DCJ contract manager and have that conversation and say, we negotiated these outputs, but you know what, the families who are working with require, increased levels of support. And, we think, we want to negotiate our outputs down because we're doing more with less people, but, doing more with those people is what's important. We don't want people to exit services simply because you need to meet your contract output. So again, it's around the conversation that you have around your contract with the provider, with DCJ. We do have a very streamlined contract variation clause in the contracts, which make changes to contracts much more straightforward, where we negotiate with you, you negotiate with us, we agree on that change. And that's, we've put that in place last year. And certainly all the feedback we've had, a lot of the feedback we've had from that clause is that it's, it's useful and effective. And so I encourage you to kind of have a look at that and see if that process is helpful.
Thank you very much.
Anthony, just finally, before we quickly move across to our little check-in, we've had some inconsistency from services where maybe they want to vary their contract now. So what they're showing is exactly what, as you just said, but they've been told to wait for recommissioning. What's the best thing to do? Is it tidy up your contract now so that you're clear about what you can deliver with the funding you have, or is it to wait now because we're in the last 12 months of the contract?
Look, I think it's really a case-by-case basis, really. I think it's a matter of, having that conversation with your commissioning and planning officer. And, some of those conversations the outcome might be that you should wait, and others might be that you make the change. It's really on a case-by-case basis. We're not, it's very difficult to kind of mandate no changes because, certainly in some places, it's very legitimate and important to make a change. So yeah, we don't have a view on that either way.
Thanks. Well, we're about to move into our quick check-in, everyone. If you can just stay with us for 10 more minutes. I just want to thank you very much, Anthony, for coming back again and hearing our questions and concerns and challenges, and trying to answer the questions the best you can with what you have. I'm going to hand over to Lauren, who will just quickly run through with you. We just want to check in about the challenges so that as we move forward, that we are actually responding to all the needs of the sector as we support you to recommissioning. So I will hand over to Lauren.
Thank you so much, Susan. So we'll be jumping back onto Mentimeter now. So if you can just grab your phones or open that that app on your web browser again, and I will set up my tech so that we're all sweet. Excellent. Can I just get a thumbs up if you can see that all okay? Fantastic. All right. So just moving back into our questions, you would have seen behind Susan, there was a word cloud that has come from the feed that we've gotten from conversations at TEI, district visits, from sector sessions online. And we're just wanting to check in, does this actually reflect your experience? So you can either choose absolutely, if it's absolutely fits your experience, that, you know, issues around funding, staff retention, looking at the transition to ACOs, DEX, you know, security. These are what are kind of critical and front of mind for your organisation. If there's something that's not quite there, you know, it's not quite nailing it for you, please pop that as your option. And if the experience is not at all reflected in this word cloud, please choose that one as well. So I'll just let you kind of sit with that for a second. I can see that a lot of people have engaged already. We've got about a third of everybody in there, which is fantastic. What we want to do is just make sure that we're constantly reflecting as an organisation at FAMS that we are actually hearing you correctly and that we're able to then advocate on your behalf, making sure that your voice is really understood and heard by us so that we can have those conversations in really informed ways. So if you haven't popped your response in yet, that would be great if you can do that. I'll just give it maybe another minute or so that we can try and get as many people in there as possible. Fantastic.
It's great to see some people are also adding to the chat. So when you're with your not quite, if you can actually let us know what else in the chat, we will be able to bring that across as well into our word cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. There will be an opportunity to be a bit more specific in the next slide. So if you have got things that you're wanting to kind of articulate that aren't captured here, please just hang on to them for just 1 minute while we capture as many people with this first slide to make sure that we've got a fairly strong picture. And so what I can sort of see at this point is that we've kind of mostly got it right, but there is some things that we haven't quite nailed yet, which is really great. We want to be able to make sure that we're getting that whole picture. So I'll leave it up there for just 1 minute. You should be able to return to this one and add to it. If you're kind of just fiddling with your tech, you haven't quite landed on it, that's not a drama. You will be able to get to it as well. Okay, so I will move on to the next one. Thank you so much for the 62 people who've provided that feedback. That's incredibly helpful for us. So the next slide is just an opportunity for you to free type in any challenges that aren't captured. And that might be because today's conversation has raised new issues for you. It might be because that the first time we kind of put this out to you that we had different priorities that you were wanting to uplift. So please just free type into this one any sort of challenges that we didn't capture in that first iteration or those first conversations. Fantastic, thank you. So yeah, inconsistencies is something that we've heard a bit today, which is a really great one for us to be considering and making sure that we're speaking to. So differences in knowledge and understanding of service delivery. Right. Lack of services being eligible. Fantastic. So making sure that we keep the voice and the needs of the children and families in the picture as we progress. A really great one to make sure that we're uplifting and highlighting. Fantastic. So again, we're sort of hearing about mixed messaging, bit of confusion, which is really important to be able to sort of speak to. Changes in CPOs. So again, it seems like the consistent messaging today is really about sort of differences in the way that that things are kind of put forward around messaging, and then a kind of on the ground CPO to service relationship.
Having myself lending you flavors all day. The coffee.
Just be mindful that you might have your audio off mute and we can just hear you at the moment.
So some concerns around support for smaller organisations, which is a really important one that we need to be considering as well. Okay, so this is great, everyone. Thank you so much. This kind of feedback is really critical to the way that we can then have conversations moving forward. Being able to understand that sometimes it's about the messaging and the consistency that's actually one of the major barriers. So really important to be able to hear that. I'll leave this one up for just one more minute while we get those last responses in. And as always, if there's, you know, something that's front of mind that you think, you know what, I actually can't capture it in this, you know, small text box, please don't hesitate to get in touch either by calling any of the team directly or emailing us at info@fams.cns.au. We're always happy to have those deeper conversations and really understand and unpack what your service experience is, especially as we're going into recommissioning. All right, we've got nearly 30 responses, which is fantastic. And as I said before, you should be able to access this again once I move on to the last slide. So I will just give it one more minute. Just wanted to make sure that we're mindful of everyone's time. Okay. And so for our, oh, no, that is the final slide. Sorry, I thought there was one more. So I will just stop sharing. Thank you so much for that feedback. Again, it's incredibly valuable to us to be able to hear your voice and being able to make sure that we are clear about what are the needs and what are the kind of pain points for the sector. Again, if you have any further things, any further comments, please just reach out to us directly. Otherwise, I will hand over to Susan to finish up today's session.
Thanks, Lauren. And thank you so much, everyone, for your input and for putting your questions together. Most importantly, I will be attending the TEI and Family Connection Support Recommissioning Council that Anthony mentioned a couple of times on Thursday. And I will have all this data, all your questions to take to that council to try and get those answered. So again, thank you very much for your time. We know how precious it is, and we look forward to supporting you through the recommissioning process and beyond. And I'll say bye.